Hi guys, how old are you? I'd love to see the age range of our viewers. Write your age below.
She stood up before I could even finish my toast. A moment I had rehearsed silently in my head for weeks. A moment I had imagined as the turning point where, for once, the attention wouldn't scatter across the room like marbles on tile, but would land fully and finally on me. Erin rose to her feet with a radiant smile and a perfectly timed flutter of her fingers against her stomach. The same stomach she had casually mentioned feeling a little off for the past few weeks, which I had dismissed as either another gluten episode or one of her theatrics. The room hushed the way it does when someone interrupts a speech, that half second of tension that could go either way. But before anyone could process it, before my mouth could even close around the word love, Erin practically beamed. "I'm pregnant," she said it with such casual sparkle, like it had just occurred to her, like it wasn't planned, like she hadn't practiced that exact line in the mirror before walking into my engagement party. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. My mother gasped, her hands flying to her mouth like she was witnessing a miracle, while my father, normally reserved to the point of being furniture, actually stood up to hug her. Glasses clinked, chairs scraped, voices rose in overlapping cheers and congratulations, and somewhere amid the celebration, my moment slipped through my fingers like sand, fast and irreversible. I stood there still holding my glass, still mid-sentence, like a background actor in a scene that had suddenly changed scripts. And just when I thought she might sit down and apologize for hijacking the moment, Erin turned to me, met my eyes, and smirked with that self-satisfied little tilt of her head she's perfected since we were children. The one she used when she broke my Walkman, kissed my prom date, or told everyone at church that I used to wet the bed. And then, as if her performance wasn't complete, she added the line that would echo in my brain for weeks. "You'll still have some attention, right?" I didn't answer her. I didn't even blink. I just raised my glass, finished the toast like a soldier marching through fire, and smiled that tight, elegant smile I'd learned from years of family gatherings where Erin's spotlight always found a way to shine brighter than mine. That night, I let everyone hug her, take selfies, rub her belly like she was some kind of fertility goddess. And I nodded and played along because it was easier than making a scene. But inside, something shifted. Not the usual frustration. Not the resigned sigh I've let out too many times. No, this was different. I didn't want to yell or cry or confront her. I wanted something better. I wanted silence. I wanted patience. I wanted revenge that didn't taste bitter but sweet. And I already knew where it would begin. Erin and I weren't enemies in the traditional sense. We didn't scream at each other or cut off contact. We played a subtler game, one of petty jabs, social power moves, and years of accumulated slights hidden behind family group texts and passive-aggressive brunches. I was always the older one, the one who followed rules, paid bills, planned things in Google Calendar, and tried not to rock the boat. Erin, she rocked the boat, swam away, and somehow got applause for it. She was the golden child with the chaotic charm, the accidental career, the Instagram engagement that ended in a breakup. And now, the surprise pregnancy that had everyone resharing her stories like it was the second coming. And even though I had the ring, the stable relationship, and the life she used to roll her eyes at, it didn't seem to matter. Not in that moment, not in that room. The irony is, I didn't even want a big wedding. Daniel and I had talked about eloping, keeping it simple, maybe a small dinner with immediate family. But after years of being the overlooked one, something inside me had wanted a day that was mine. Not perfect, not lavish, just mine. And Erin took that. Casually, effortlessly, like she was picking fruit from a tree I'd spent years trying to grow. And the worst part? She genuinely believed she'd done nothing wrong. That "you'll still have some attention, right?" was her way of joking, of diffusing the tension, of pretending she didn't just detonate a bomb under my feet. But I didn't tell her how I felt. I didn't make a scene. Instead, I spent the rest of the evening floating between guests, smiling and thanking them for coming, accepting compliments that felt diluted and polite, while Erin basked in a glow that had nothing to do with me. Daniel noticed, of course. He always does. Later that night, he asked if I was okay, and I lied, not convincingly, but enough to change the subject. I didn't want him to see the wheels turning. I didn't want him to talk me out of what I was already planning, because this time, I wasn't going to let it slide. I wasn't going to wait for Erin to realize what she'd done, apologize 3 weeks too late, and expect everything to go back to normal. No, this time, I was going to reclaim the moment. I was going to take back the stage without shouting, without tantrums, without stooping to her level. I was going to remind her, and everyone else, that quiet does not mean weak, and polite does not mean passive, and it would all begin with something deceptively simple, a guest list. Because if she wanted to steal the show at my party, then she should have read the script more carefully. Because I was about to change the ending, and the best part, she wouldn't even see it coming. There's something quietly powerful about editing a spreadsheet, especially when the cells you're trimming and rearranging hold the names of the very people who believe they're entitled to moments they never earned, to titles they never respected, to roles they think come pre-packaged with blood ties. I sat at my dining table the morning after the party, the table still holding the remnants of champagne glasses and half-emptied bowls of sugared pecans, and stared at the neatly alphabetized guest list, with a strange sense of calm that belied the chaos I felt hours earlier. There was no rage in my fingers as I clicked the delete button next to Erin's name from the bridal suite group, no tremble as I moved her from inner circle to general seating, no guilt as I changed her invite tag to a clean and impersonal Erin guest +1. It wasn't cruelty, it was clarity, a long overdue moment of understanding that just because someone shares your DNA doesn't mean they deserve front row access to your life's most sacred moments. Daniel watched from the kitchen, quietly sipping his coffee, not commenting, just existing nearby in that safe, observant way he always did when he sensed I needed space, but didn't trust myself to ask for it. He didn't need to ask what I was doing. He saw my face the night before, saw the way I clutched my wine glass a little tighter than usual, the way my smile stayed too long and my laughter came a beat late, the way I kept glancing at Erin as if expecting her to realize what she'd done and fix it, even though deep down I already knew she wouldn't. She never did. So when he finally spoke, it was a simple, measured sentence. Do what you need to do. And with that quiet permission, I did. The first change I made was logistical. No children under the age of 2 allowed at the venue. A reasonable rule, one many weddings enforce, one that could be blamed on the vineyard's policy if anyone decided to question it. But we both knew who that rule was for. Erin's due date, calculated from her own Instagram announcement the night before, would land her baby's birth roughly 6 weeks before the wedding, which meant if she wanted to come, she'd either have to leave a newborn at home, unlikely, or cause a scene protesting the policy, which would only serve to make her look selfish. Either way, I'd forced her hand without ever raising my voice. Next, I revised the rehearsal dinner invite list. Gone was Erin's name, replaced by a quiet note to the caterer. 27 confirmed guests, all adults, all direct wedding participants. I planned a relaxed, candlelit evening, intimate and quiet, with speeches from close friends, a playlist of old songs Daniel and I used to send each other when we were long distance. And no distractions, no last-minute announcements, no surprises. My mother asked about the omission a few days later, casually, as if she hadn't noticed it until she was checking her own calendar, but the way she hesitated before speaking told me she knew exactly what she was asking. "Is Erin coming to the dinner?" she said, stirring her tea with the kind of exaggerated focus people use when they're trying to sound neutral. I looked up from my planner and met her gaze directly, something I'd rarely done in moments like this. "She's invited to the wedding," I replied simply, "not the dinner." My mother didn't argue, didn't protest, just nodded once, her mouth tightening into that thin, pursed line. I'd seen her make 100 times when Erin had done something unkind but clever, something disruptive but forgivable, something just inside the lines of what could be dismissed with a sigh and a half-hearted, "That's just how she is, but this wasn't about punishment." I wasn't trying to hurt her. I was reclaiming the kind of boundaries no one ever taught me I was allowed to enforce. Not against strangers, but against family. Because family, in our house, had always been synonymous with endurance. You endured Erin's chaos, endured her jokes at your expense, endured the way she'd borrow your clothes and return them stained, how she'd call you boring in front of your friends, how she'd flake on plans you made 6 weeks in advance, but expect you to rearrange your life for hers with a single text. You endured it because she was family, because she didn't mean it, because she had a good heart underneath it all. But what no one ever talked about was how exhausting it is to constantly shrink yourself to make room for someone else's fire. How lonely it is to host your own celebration and feel like a guest. How infuriating it is to be told your resentment is a character flaw, while her disregard is just personality. Erin didn't notice the changes at first, or if she did, she didn't mention them. She sent a follow-up text the week after the party, breezy and self-satisfied, saying she hoped I wasn't mad and that she was just too excited to wait, as if blurting out life-changing news at someone else's engagement toast was the same as giving them an early birthday card. I didn't respond for 2 days. When I finally did, it was one sentence. Looking forward to seeing you at the ceremony. No warmth, no emojis, no further clarification. Just a cold reminder that her involvement had been demoted. Not publicly, not cruelly, but unmistakably. A few days later, she texted again, asking what color the bridesmaids were wearing. I told her I wasn't having bridesmaids. A decision I'd actually made long ago, but one I was more grateful for now than ever. Her next message came faster. Oh, so no toast from the sister of the bride? This time, I waited only an hour before replying. Trying to keep the reception short and sweet. Hope that's okay. I knew it would drive her crazy, the ambiguity, the lack of direct confrontation. Erin thrived on chaos, on explosions, on knowing exactly what the drama was about so she could spin the narrative and play the victim. But silence? Strategic, surgical silence? That was a language she didn't speak. Still, I could feel it building. The tension, the questions, the realization that this wasn't going to be like all the other times. She would feel it when the invitation arrived in the mail, when she saw her name printed without fanfare, when she realized that this wedding wasn't going to be her stage, her audience, her moment to steal. And I didn't have to shout or plead or throw a tantrum to make that happen. All I had to do was sit at my kitchen table, open my laptop, and change a few cells on a spreadsheet. And that's exactly what I did. There's something unsettlingly final about sealing an envelope that you know will change the way someone looks at you, especially when the person on the other end of that crisp fold has spent a lifetime mistaking your silence for submission, your patience for weakness, and your kindness for permission to walk all over you. When I pressed the gold seal down on the invitation addressed to Erin Jameson, no middle name, no titles, just her name and +1 on the outer envelope, I didn't feel triumphant, and I certainly didn't feel vindictive. What I felt was steadier, cooler, more composed. The quiet certainty of someone who's no longer willing to host their own erasure. That envelope held more than details about dates and venues. It was a boundary, clearly drawn and delicately worded. A message so restrained it could only be read as intentional. And as I suspected, it took her less than 48 hours after receiving it to completely unravel. The call came at 9:32 on a Thursday morning, while I was standing in line at the post office, returning a pair of shoes I'd ordered online, and hated the second I saw them in natural light. My phone lit up with her name, and I already knew before answering that this wouldn't be one of those fake, casual, "Hey, just checking in" calls she made when she wanted something, or worse, when she wanted to pretend nothing had happened. No, this would be the kind of call where her voice started off tight and falsely measured, like a violin string stretched just past its limit, followed by a crescendo of accusations delivered with the dramatic flair of someone who still believed every conversation was a courtroom and she alone held the moral high ground. And I wasn't wrong. The first thing she said wasn't "hi" or "how are you," or even something performatively pleasant like "hope you're having a good morning." No. What she said, with a venom that immediately told me she'd read the invitation at least 10 times and possibly rehearsed this entire rant in her bathroom mirror, was, "What the hell is this supposed to mean?" There was no confusion in her voice, just outrage that I had finally stepped off the well-worn script she had written for both of us years ago. I didn't pretend to misunderstand. I didn't offer a soothing lie or a disingenuous excuse. I simply said, "It's an invitation to my wedding." That, apparently, was the spark she needed to ignite the full explosion. She launched into a tirade that might have seemed unhinged if I hadn't heard variations of it my entire life. How this was clearly retaliation, how I was being vindictive over something so small, how the rest of the family would see it for what it was. As if this vague collective of judgmental relatives had always been my jury. She accused me of trying to make a statement, of ruining what should be a joyful time for everyone, and then, in a moment of stunning lack of self-awareness, actually said, "This isn't about you, Nora, it's about family." I almost laughed. Almost. But I didn't give her that satisfaction. Instead, I told her calmly, without raising my voice or sharpening my tone, that after years of being the sister who adjusted, who accommodated, who kept her mouth shut for the sake of family harmony, I was finally planning something that reflected my actual boundaries. I told her that I wasn't punishing her. I was simply making choices based on patterns. And that, unfortunately, her patterns had made her an unreliable and disruptive presence at key moments in my life. I reminded her, without spite, that she had made a very clear choice at my engagement party, and that I was now making mine. For a second, there was silence on the other end of the line. The kind of breathless pause that only ever happens when Erin's brain is trying to decide whether to escalate or withdraw. But rather than reflect, or even pretend to understand, she pivoted in the only way she knew how, into full-blown emotional manipulation. She started crying. Not quietly or subtly, but the kind of exaggerated, performative sobbing that worked wonders in our childhood, especially when my parents would walk into a room mid-conflict and see her red-faced and trembling while I stood frozen, still trying to process whatever injustice had just occurred. "You're being cruel," she said between sniffles. "You're jealous because I'm having a baby and you think I stole your thunder." It was almost impressive how neatly she condensed every insecurity she imagined I might have into a single weaponized sentence. But I didn't flinch. I didn't shout. I didn't explain myself. I simply said, "I'm getting married. That's what this is about." Then, before she could spiral further, I added the line I had rehearsed for days. "You said I'd still get some attention. I'm just making sure of it." And I hung up. The fallout came quickly, as I knew it would. Within hours, my mother texted to ask if there had been a misunderstanding. My aunt, who's never passed up an opportunity to play peacemaker when drama arises, left me a voicemail that began with, "Now I'm not taking sides, but," and ended with a plea to just keep things simple and happy. Erin, naturally, posted a vague Instagram story about toxic energy and keeping your circle small, followed by a photo of her holding her belly in front of a mirror with the caption, "Can't wait to meet you, little light." I didn't respond, not because I didn't have feelings about all of it. I did. And they ranged from deep irritation to a bittersweet sense of liberation, but because silence was no longer something I was forced into. It was something I had chosen. Later that evening, as Daniel and I sat on the couch watching reruns of a show we both liked but never really paid attention to, he turned to me and said, "I think you've been too generous for too long." And though I didn't reply, I felt something shift, not in a grand cinematic way, but in the quiet internal settling of a truth finally acknowledged. I wasn't doing this out of bitterness. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I was simply reclaiming space that had never truly been mine. And that started with making sure that this time, no one else would steal the microphone. But what I didn't know, not yet at least, was that Erin wasn't finished. She had one more trick planned, and it wouldn't come in a phone call or a text, or even a post. No, the next move would come in person. And it would take place somewhere she knew I couldn't avoid her, where her audience would be large, her timing impossible to ignore, and her intentions wrapped, once again, in a bow of forced sincerity. I should have known better. I should have expected it, but I didn't, not until she walked into my dress fitting. Uninvited, and not alone. I had imagined the dress fitting as one of those sacred rituals women whisper about in nostalgic tones. A quiet, sunlit afternoon, surrounded by soft music, friendly mirrors, and only the people who truly understood the weight of the moment. The intimacy of choosing the one garment that would forever be preserved in photographs, memories, and whispered stories passed down to nieces and maybe one day, daughters. It was supposed to be personal, private, free of the usual chaos that seemed to follow my sister into every room she entered, like a perfume too strong to ignore. And that's precisely why I kept the invitation list short, deliberately so. Just myself, the boutique owner, Daniel's cousin Grace, my calm, competent, unofficial maid of honor, and a close friend who flew in early. No fanfare, no spectacle. Just silk champagne and a space where, for once, my body and my choices and my voice were not backdrops to someone else's spotlight. And for about 12 minutes, it was exactly that. The boutique was nestled on a quiet block just outside the city, the kind of place that doesn't advertise much, where dresses are referred to as gowns, where the hangers are padded and the stylists whisper. It was everything I had wanted, elegant, understated, and blessedly shielded from the noise. I had just slipped into the second gown, a backless crepe sheath with sleeves that reminded me of old Hollywood, of grace and restraint and all the things I had tried to embody during the slow unraveling of my engagement party. When the chime above the door rang out, sharp and sudden, breaking the soft murmur of compliments and the hushed rustle of tulle. For a moment I didn't turn. I assumed it was the assistant returning with a different belt, or maybe Grace grabbing her forgotten purse, but then I heard it. That unmistakable voice, too loud for the room, saying, "I figured you wouldn't mind if I popped in. I mean, I am the sister of the bride." There was a moment, half a second, no more, where I genuinely thought I might be hallucinating. Erin stood in the doorway like she belonged there, like I had simply forgotten to include her by mistake, and the universe had corrected the oversight for me. She wore heels too high for a boutique appointment, a dress too short for sitting, and a smile that was all teeth and zero sincerity. Behind her trailed a woman I didn't recognize immediately, tall, athletic, camera in hand, clicking away with the breezy confidence of someone who's used to being paid by the hour. It took me a second to place her, and then I remembered the name, Madeline, one of Erin's friends from her marketing job. A self-proclaimed lifestyle content curator who posted wedding reels for strangers and claimed it was just for fun. And just like that, I knew exactly why Erin was here. She hadn't come to support me. She hadn't come to make amends. She had come for content. Before I could speak, she was already gesturing to the camera, twirling in a circle, narrating to her imaginary audience. "My sister's big moment," she cooed, as if we hadn't spoken and clipped cold sentences for weeks, as if she hadn't screamed into my voicemail about betrayal and exclusion and family politics. She walked toward me, eyes scanning the gown I wore like a critic reviewing a rival's premiere. "Oh, I like this one," she said with a tilt of her head. "It hides the hips. Good choice." I stood completely still, arms at my sides, not trusting myself to move or speak. Grace looked at me, silently asking if she should intervene, but I shook my head. I needed to see where this was going. I needed to know just how far Erin was willing to push. The photographer, if I could even call her that, began snapping shots with no invitation, no warning, angling herself so the mirrors caught every angle. "Let's get a sister's photo," she chirped. "Maybe by the window. That lighting is amazing." I didn't smile. I didn't pose. I stood like a mannequin, watching my own fitting slip out of my hands, second by second, like all the others. Erin threw her arm around me, leaned in, and whispered just loud enough for the camera's mic to catch it. "We're going to break the internet with this one." That was the moment something inside me stopped resisting. Because this wasn't about dresses or invitations or etiquette. This was about the ongoing erosion of boundaries I had spent my adult life quietly reinforcing, only to have them bulldozed in broad daylight by someone who believed every space was hers to take. Erin didn't care about weddings. She didn't even care about me. She cared about optics, about staying in the frame, about making sure her narrative, the radiant sister blessing her bride sibling, made it to whatever curated, overly filtered feed she was using to manage public perception. And I knew right then that if I didn't do something permanent, something she couldn't twist or photograph or narrate away, she would keep doing this, not just now, but for every milestone, every celebration, every new chapter I dared to claim for myself. So I smiled. For the first time that day, I really smiled. And I leaned in too, not for the camera, not for her, but for what came next. "Thank you for coming," I said softly, almost kindly. "But I've got a surprise for you." Erin's face flickered, just briefly, with something that looked like confusion. She hadn't planned for a response. She expected fury or a scene or maybe a tearful plea. She didn't know what to do with calm. That was my advantage. That evening, I reached out to someone I hadn't expected to speak to again. Caroline, her former best friend, someone who had drifted from Erin's orbit months ago under circumstances that were never made public. I asked Caroline one question. "Do you still have that video?" She replied almost immediately, "Which one?" And when I explained, her response was swift. "Of course, I kept a copy. I always keep a copy." The next day, while Erin posted edited clips from the fitting with captions like, "Love conquers all," and "Sisters first, drama last," I sent the boutique an official request to prevent outside guests at all future fittings, and a written thank you to the assistant who'd offered to accidentally delete any photo she'd been asked to take. But more importantly, I scheduled a private appointment with Daniel and the DJ. I told them I had a new plan for the reception, one that required audio, a projector, and a very specific set of timing cues. Because if Erin wanted attention, if she wanted the audience, the narrative, the screen time, I was ready to give it to her. In high definition, with perfect lighting, and absolutely no way to edit herself out. There is a distinct kind of stillness that fills a bridal suite just before the ceremony begins. Not silence, not absence of sound, but a layered quiet. A hum of nerves and fabric and heartbeats that feels almost sacred. Like standing backstage before stepping into a version of yourself you've spent years constructing. I remember standing in front of the full-length mirror, not fussing with my hair or adjusting the gown, but just looking at the woman in white who had chosen clarity over chaos, distance over drama, peace over performance, and who now stood not as a backdrop or a secondary character in someone else's story, but as the rightful center of her own. My reflection didn't blink. It didn't falter, and neither did I. Because by then, the choice had already been made, not just to marry Daniel, but to tell a story, one final story that couldn't be hijacked or spun or edited, one that would live in the room long after the cake had been cut and the flowers had wilted. The guests had arrived early, as they tend to do when they're curious more than supportive. Friends, cousins, family acquaintances, some of whom had already been whispering for weeks about the drama between the sisters, their tone always half concerned and half thrilled, as if family rifts were their version of wedding entertainment. I didn't blame them. Gossip is easier to digest than silence. At least with gossip, people feel like they know where to stand. But the truth, the actual truth, layered and difficult and shaped by years of small injuries no one ever talks about. That kind of truth makes people uncomfortable, so they laugh it off, wrap it in wedding cliches, and hope it doesn't reach them. And then, of course, she arrived. Erin stepped into the vineyard courtyard with the practiced grace of someone who had made entrances her entire life. She wore cream, not pure white, no, she wasn't that tactless, but a soft shade that skimmed the edge of decency, a designer dress that clung to her like a dare, her hair styled in waves that belonged in perfume ads, not family events. Her smile was wide, calculated, framed by lipstick too bold for morning light. And her presence was magnetic, as always. People turned, eyes widened, whispers rippled. She kissed cheeks, laughed too loudly, and navigated the space like a politician at a fundraiser. Charming, familiar, inescapable. She approached me before the ceremony began, cornering me with a faux sweet, "You look beautiful," and the kind of hug that feels more like surveillance than affection. I said nothing about the dress. I didn't comment on the photographer trailing behind her, or the subtle way she adjusted her posture so she'd be slightly taller in photos. I didn't flinch when she murmured, "Let's keep today simple," because I already knew she had no idea what was coming. That was the gift. She thought I'd moved on, that I'd chosen the high road. And in a way, I had. I just built the road myself. The ceremony was flawless. Crisp vows, teary smiles, a breeze that moved through the vineyard like a blessing. Daniel looked at me like I was the beginning of something worth building, and I held his hand like it was already home. We kissed, we walked back down the aisle to soft applause, and for a moment it felt untouched by anything else. No past, no shadow, just us. But the reception was always where it would happen. That was the stage. Dinner was served, glasses were raised, toasts were made. Polite, funny, sentimental, all the things they were supposed to be. Erin drank white wine and laughed at all the right moments. She posed for photos like she belonged at the center of them. She even managed a quick speech, impromptu of course, where she said, "I always knew Nora would find someone patient enough to love her." And the room laughed as if it weren't a subtle dig dressed as affection. I smiled, I nodded, I said thank you, and I waited. Because then came the montage. The screen lowered slowly, the lights dimmed, and the room, lulled by champagne and charcuterie, leaned in with curiosity. The first photo was of me at 7, holding a spelling bee trophy, while Erin, 5 and scowling, stood beside me with the arms crossed. Laughter. Then another photo. My high school graduation. Erin in the front of the frame, blocking my cap. More laughter. Then more. Birthday candles blown out by her, not me. My college acceptance letter being read aloud by her while I looked on. Photos where I was clearly cropped halfway out. Smiles frozen on the edges of the frame. At first, it was funny. Then it wasn't. The voiceover began. Calm, die mine. For years, I said, I thought sharing meant disappearing. That being a good sister meant shrinking in small ways, giving up big moments, staying quiet for the sake of the photograph. I was wrong. The room fell still. No one moved. No one laughed. So today my voice continued. I want to thank someone. Because without Erin, I might never have learned to stop erasing myself. I might never have understood the difference between forgiveness and permission. I might never have realized that sometimes the only way to reclaim a story is to write the ending yourself. When the lights came back up, Erin's face was unreadable. Not red with embarrassment or wet with tears, but frozen in something more dangerous. Calculation. She stood slowly, said nothing, walked to the bar, ordered something strong, and didn't return to her table. People avoided her eyes. The photographer quietly packed up and left. Her carefully curated public persona had cracked, not with scandal, but with narrative. She had been outperformed at her own game, and worse, she hadn't even seen the performance coming. Days passed, then a week. She didn't call, but then 2 weeks after the honeymoon, a call came. Not from her, but from someone I didn't expect. Marcus, her ex, the baby's father, the man who had vanished sometime during her second trimester and been reduced in her stories to a careless, flaky mistake. He called me because, as it turned out, someone had sent him the wedding video. Caroline, probably. Or maybe someone else who thought he deserved to know the kind of woman about to raise his child. He asked questions, long questions, serious ones. I answered only what I had to. Then I let the silence speak for itself. The last I heard, he was pursuing shared custody, maybe more, and Erin, she did what Erin always does. posted a photo of the baby's crib, an inspirational quote, and waited for the comments to roll in. I didn't comment. I didn't say a word. Because sometimes the most satisfying kind of justice isn't loud or immediate or explosive. It's quiet, irreversible, and undeniable. Just like a wedding invitation with your name moved to the second line. Just like a voiceover no one can interrupt. Just like a screen that fades to black while you're still standing in the middle of the room, waiting for someone to look at you the way they used to. But they don't. Not anymore.